Danny Brooks had always considered himself a regular guy. At 25, he lived in a small, cluttered apartment in the city, working as a programmer for a startup that barely paid the bills. He didn't have much, but he had a routine, and that was enough. Until one morning, when his life was turned upside down by a letter he hadn't expected. It arrived in the mail, an envelope so formal it looked out of place among the usual bills and advertisements. The address on the front was unfamiliar, Brooks Family Estate, in large, elegant letters. Danny furrowed his brow. He had never heard of the name before. Inside the envelope was a single letter. As he read, his confusion only deepened. Dear Mr. Brooks, we are writing to inform you of the recent passing of your distant relative, Charles Brooks. Mr. Brooks, who was a private scholar and inventor, has left you the entirety of his estate, including his residence in the countryside. The property has been maintained and remains in pristine condition. Please accept our condolences for your loss and make arrangements to take ownership of the estate at your earliest convenience. We believe this property might be of significant interest to you. Yours sincerely, the Brooks Estate Lawyers. Danny's mind raced as he finished reading. A mansion in the countryside, and it was his. He didn't know anyone named Charles Brooks, nor had he ever heard of the estate. His family had never been rich or well-known. In fact, his parents were long gone, and he'd grown up in foster homes, bouncing from place to place. So where had this inheritance come from? And why hadn't anyone mentioned it before? His curiosity got the better of him. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone had mixed up the names, but still, the idea of owning a mansion was tempting. Maybe he could sell it for a nice sum, move out of his tiny apartment, and finally live the life he had always dreamed of. After a few days of thinking it over, Danny decided to check it out. He packed a bag, booked a train ticket, and made his way to the countryside. The estate was located far from the city, in a small, quiet village that seemed to be stuck in time. The train ride itself felt like stepping into another world. As Danny stepped off the train, the air smelled fresh, the fields were green, and the people seemed to move slower, as if the hustle and bustle of modern life had never reached them. A taxi took him to the mansion. As they drove down a narrow, winding road, Danny could barely make out the shape of the house through the trees. It was huge, much bigger than he had imagined. The house stood at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by tall, stone walls and gates. It looked ancient, but well-kept, almost as if it had been frozen in time. The taxi driver dropped him off at the gate and wished him luck, not offering much in the way of conversation. Danny stood there for a moment, staring up at the large iron doors of the mansion. It was both impressive and a little intimidating. The estate was old, the kind of place that might belong to a family with a long history, something Danny had never been a part of. Taking a deep breath, Danny pushed open the gate and walked toward the front door. He had never felt so out of place in his life, but there was something about the mansion that pulled him in, something that made him feel like he was meant to be there. The front door creaked open as he pushed it, and he stepped into a grand foyer. The first thing he noticed was the silence. It was so quiet, it felt like the house was holding its breath. The floors were made of polished wood, and the walls were lined with dark, heavy tapestries. The place was enormous, but oddly empty. No signs of life. No servants, no guests, no family members. Just him and the house. He wandered from room to room, exploring the mansion's many halls and chambers. Each room had its own character. A library filled with old books, a sitting room with antique furniture, and even a small observatory with a dusty telescope pointing toward the sky. There were no personal touches, no signs that anyone had lived here for years. It was as though the house was waiting for something, or someone, to bring it back to life. Danny's footsteps echoed in the vast, empty halls. As he walked deeper into the mansion, he began to notice strange things. Symbols etched into the woodwork, faint markings on the walls, and strange mechanical devices hidden in corners. The house was old, yes, but it didn't feel entirely normal. Something about it seemed otherworldly. His thoughts were interrupted by a door that seemed out of place, at the far end of a narrow hallway, a door that appeared completely ordinary, yet somehow different. It wasn't locked, but it had no handle, only a faint indentation, like it had been waiting for someone to open it. With a mix of curiosity and unease, Danny reached out and pushed the door open. The room inside was small, and for a moment, Danny wasn't sure what he was looking at. There was a soft, glowing light coming from the center of the room, illuminating a figure standing in the middle. She looked human, yet not quite. Her skin was pale, almost silver, and her eyes glowed a faint, unnatural shade of blue. She wore a long, flowing garment that shimmered in the dim light. Danny froze. The air in the room seemed to thrum with energy, and for a moment he couldn't speak. The figure simply stood there, staring at him with a calm, knowing gaze. "Who are you?" Danny finally managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. The figure smiled, but it wasn't a smile of warmth. It was something else, something much older, much stranger. "I am Lyra," she said, her voice smooth and melodic. "And you are not supposed to be here." Danny stood frozen at the threshold of the room, his mind struggling to catch up with what he was seeing. The figure in front of him, Lyra, looked like a person, but she wasn't quite human. Her pale skin shimmered faintly, and her glowing blue eyes seemed to pierce through him. The room itself felt charged with an energy that made Danny's skin prickle. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Lyra's expression was calm, but there was something unreadable about her gaze, as if she was calculating every detail of his appearance. Danny opened his mouth, but no words came out. He didn't know whether to run or try to speak. Finally, he found his voice. "What? Who are you?" Lyra tilted her head slightly, as if surprised by the question. Her lips curved into a small smile, though it didn't seem to reach her eyes. "I am Lyra," she said softly. "I've been here for a very long time." Danny's heart raced. "What do you mean, a very long time? Are you some kind of ghost?" "No," Lyra said with a faint laugh. "I am not a ghost. But I suppose you could say I am something else, something not of this world." Danny took a step back, the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't a ghost. She wasn't human. The room around him seemed to hum with an almost alien energy, like the air itself was alive with something foreign. He wasn't sure whether to run or demand more answers. His curiosity won out, as it usually did. "Where are you from?" Danny asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm from far away," Lyra said, her voice quiet but firm. "From a place you cannot imagine, a place beyond your world." Danny's mind raced. "What are you doing here? Why have you been hiding in this mansion?" Lyra's eyes darkened for a moment, her gaze shifting to the walls around them. "I've been waiting," she said slowly, her words tinged with sadness. "Waiting for a way home." Danny didn't understand. "A way home? You mean you're not from Earth?" "No," Lyra replied, shaking her head. "I crash-landed here many years ago. My ship was damaged beyond repair, and I've been stranded ever since." Danny blinked, feeling the weight of her words. "You're an alien?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded. "Yes, I am a traveler from the stars, and I've been hiding, waiting for the day when I can repair my ship and return to my people." Danny stared at her in shock. An alien. A real, live alien. His mind struggled to process the information. For so long, he had thought that aliens were just stories, things you saw in movies or read about in books. But here she was, standing right in front of him. "I didn't mean to surprise you," Lyra said, her voice softening. "But the time has come. I can't stay hidden forever. My presence, it's becoming too dangerous." Danny was still processing everything she had said. "Dangerous? Why? What do you mean?" Lyra took a deep breath, her silver blue eyes locking onto his. There are others. My enemies. They've been searching for me for a long time. If they find me, they won't stop until they capture me and use my knowledge. They want my technology. They want everything I know. A chill ran down Danny's spine. He could hear the fear in Lyra's voice, despite how composed she seemed. Who are these people? What do they want from you? They are called the Kelsari, Lyra said, her face growing more serious. A ruthless race of conquerors. They've already taken over many worlds. If they get their hands on my ship's technology, they will use it to control entire galaxies. Danny's stomach twisted with dread. The Kelsari. He had never heard of them before, but the way Lyra spoke, it was clear that they were a force to be reckoned with. A force that could destroy everything in their path. How? How can I help? Danny asked, his voice trembling. He wasn't sure why he was asking. He wasn't some action hero or soldier. But something about Lyra's story, her quiet strength, pulled him in. He wanted to help her, even though he barely understood what was happening. Lyra's eyes softened, but there was still a sadness in them. There is a way, she said, but it requires something I don't have. She paused, looking down at the floor for a moment before meeting his eyes again. I need a power source to fix my ship. Without it, I cannot leave. Danny's mind raced as he tried to think of what kind of power source she might need, but nothing came to him. He had no idea what kind of technology she was talking about. Lyra seemed to sense his confusion. It's an energy crystal, she explained, a rare and powerful object. Without it, I cannot complete the repairs. Danny looked around the room, as if expecting to see the crystal somewhere nearby. Where do I find it? How can we get it? Lyra shook her head. It's not something you can simply find. It's hidden, locked away, and it will not be easy to retrieve. The weight of the situation sank in. Danny had only just discovered this strange, alien girl in his new mansion, and now he was being asked to help her find a powerful artifact to save her, and perhaps the entire world. It was all too much, too fast. But despite his fear and confusion, he couldn't turn his back on her. I'll help you, Danny said, his voice steady. Tell me what to do. We'll find it. Lyra nodded, her expression softening. Thank you, she said quietly. You don't know how much this means to me. As Danny looked at Lyra, standing there with an air of mystery and determination, he realized something. His life had just become more than ordinary. The mansion, the letter, and now Lyra. Everything had led him to this moment. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for sure. His world had just changed forever. The weight of Lyra's words hung heavily in the air. Danny felt like the world around him had shifted. One moment, he was just a regular guy with no idea of what was to come, and the next, he was standing in the middle of a mansion with an alien girl who was asking for his help to escape a deadly enemy. I don't know how we'll find this crystal, but I'll help you, Danny had promised. He didn't know exactly what he was getting into, but something about Lyra's calm, determined face made him believe in her. It was clear she wasn't just some lost alien. She was a survivor. Lyra's expression softened when he made his vow, but there was no time for thanks. She had already begun pacing back and forth, her eyes scanning the walls, the floor, the ceiling, as though she was looking for something that only she could see. We don't have much time, she said, snapping Danny out of his thoughts. The Kelsari are always watching. They'll be here soon, and when they arrive, they won't leave until they have me. Danny swallowed hard. But how do they even know where you are? The mansion's huge. It's isolated. We're safe here, right? Lyra's eyes darkened with concern. I thought so too. But my ship, she paused, looking at him with a pained expression. My ship is powerful. It sends out signals, weak pulses. The Kelsari can track those. They've already picked up on them. A sense of dread filled Danny's chest. This wasn't just some alien drama. It was real. Someone, or something, was coming for them. Then what do we do? he asked, his voice tight. Lyra walked over to a large, ornate table in the center of the room. She began to swipe her hand across the surface, and before Danny could react, a hidden panel slid open. Beneath it was a series of buttons and switches, some glowing faintly, others dark. She pressed one, and the walls of the room seemed to shift, revealing more hidden mechanisms. The mansion was designed to protect itself, she explained. It's old, but its technology is advanced. Danny watched in awe as the room seemed to come alive with the sound of moving gears and clicking locks. The walls weren't just walls. They were parts of an ancient defense system. It was as if the mansion itself had been waiting for a moment like this, prepared for an invasion that had never come, until now. Suddenly, there was a loud, echoing sound that shook the entire mansion, followed by a low, almost mechanical hum. Lyra froze, her eyes widening with alarm. Danny didn't have to ask. He already knew. They had arrived. The Kelsari. Danny quickly moved to the window and looked outside. The view was vast. The mansion sat atop a small hill surrounded by dense forest. But now, through the trees, he could make out the dark shapes of ships descending from the sky. The Kelsari ships. They're here, Danny said, his voice shaking. What do we do? Lyra's face was grim. We don't have time to hide. We need to act fast. She moved toward the center of the room and gestured for Danny to follow. The mansion's defense system can hold them off for a while, but not forever. We need to buy time. Danny felt a rush of adrenaline. What can I do to help? Lyra didn't hesitate. You need to disable the communication systems. If the Kelsari can't get a signal out, they won't be able to call for reinforcements. She handed him a small metal device that fit in the palm of his hand. This is an EMP device. It will short-circuit their communication systems for a short time. Danny stared at the device. It looked like something from a sci-fi movie, small and sleek, but brimming with technology he didn't understand. How does it work? Just press the button, Lyra said with a strained look. I've already prepared the mansion's defenses, but we need to make sure they don't contact their fleet. Danny nodded. He didn't need to know exactly how it worked. He just needed to do his part. Got it. With Lyra leading the way, they moved through the mansion, making their way to a small room at the back. Inside, a wall of monitors blinked with activity, showing various views of the mansion's exterior. Lyra quickly began typing on the nearest terminal, her fingers moving fast, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Is there anything else we can do to fight them? Danny asked, watching the ships slowly descend toward the estate. Anything to stop them from getting inside? Lyra's face hardened. The mansion can defend itself, but it's not enough for a full-scale invasion. We need to keep them at bay long enough to get to the power crystal. She glanced at him. This is your fight now, too. We have to buy time. Danny clenched his fists. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even someone who dealt with conflict. But this wasn't just some battle for his own life. This was bigger than him. If the Kelsari got their hands on Lyra, it would be the end of everything. The ground shook again as a blast echoed outside. The Kelsari were closing in, their ships landing with a thunderous crash. Danny's heart raced, but he focused on the task at hand. He pressed the button on the EMP device, and a low hum filled the room. The monitors flickered, and for a brief moment, everything went silent. Lyra turned, a small smile on her face. Good. Now we have a little more time. But as she spoke, a loud crash came from the hallway. The door to the room burst open, and a figure appeared in the doorway. A tall, armored Kelsari soldier, his eyes glowing with malice. Too late, the soldier hissed. Lyra's face turned cold. She stepped forward, her hands glowing with a strange, silvery light. The soldier raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Lyra unleashed a pulse of energy that sent him crashing into the wall. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Danny's breath caught in his throat. You can do that. Lyra nodded. I am not without my own weapons. But as more Kelsari soldiers appeared in the hallway, Danny realized that they couldn't rely on just Lyra's power alone. The real battle had only just begun. The Kelsari soldier's body lay still on the floor, a testament to Lyra's power. His armor was dented, and the eerie glow from his eyes had faded, leaving him unconscious. But before Danny could fully process what had just happened, more soldiers began pouring into the hallway, their boots echoing as they marched toward the room. The sound of heavy footsteps was deafening. Lyra turned toward Danny. "We can't stay here," she said, urgency in her voice. "They'll send more. We need to move." Danny's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't prepared for a fight like this. He had never imagined himself facing alien soldiers in a high-tech mansion. But there was no time for fear. If they didn't move, they'd be caught. "Where do we go?" Danny asked, his voice tense. Lyra looked around quickly, scanning the room. "Follow me." She turned and ran toward another door at the far side of the room. Danny hesitated for a split second, then followed. They moved swiftly, through a series of narrow hallways, each one darker than the last. The mansion, with its hidden doors and secret passages, felt like a maze now, more like a trap than a sanctuary. But Lyra seemed to know exactly where she was going. She led him through several turns, her pace never slowing. The hum of the Kelsari ships outside was growing louder, the ground shaking beneath their feet with each passing moment. Danny could feel the tension in the air, thick with the promise of danger. Lyra glanced over her shoulder, her expression hardening. "We have to reach the basement," she said, her voice low. "There's a hidden chamber there. It's the safest place for now." Danny nodded, barely keeping up as Lyra moved through the mansion like she had lived there her whole life. It was clear that whatever was hidden in the basement was important, probably their last hope of survival. They reached a large wooden door at the end of a corridor. Lyra stepped forward, placing her hand on a strange panel hidden in the wall next to it. A soft beep echoed, and the door clicked open, revealing a long staircase leading downward into darkness. "This way," Lyra said, urging Danny to follow her. Danny hesitated for a moment, glancing back toward the hallway. He could hear the Kelsari soldiers coming closer. There was no time to waste. He stepped into the darkness behind her. The stairs creaked beneath their feet as they descended. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in around them. Danny could barely see anything, relying on the faint glow from Lyra's eyes to guide the way. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the bottom. The basement was large and cold, with stone walls that looked as though they had been carved from the earth itself. At the far end of the room was a heavy metal door. Lyra moved toward it, her steps quick and determined. "This is it," she said, her voice steady. She tapped a sequence of numbers into a small keypad beside the door, and after a brief moment, it opened with a soft hiss. Inside, the room was starkly different from the rest of the mansion. It was filled with high-tech equipment, glowing consoles, and strange machines that Danny couldn't even begin to understand. In the center of the room was a large, glowing object, a pedestal with a crystal embedded in it. Danny's eyes widened as he took in the sight. "Is that the power crystal?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded. "Yes, that is the key to my ship's repair. With it, I can fix the damage and leave this world behind." She stepped forward, reaching for the crystal. But before she could touch it, a loud crash echoed from above. The sound of footsteps grew louder, followed by shouting. The Kelsari were closer than ever. Lyra's face tightened. "They found us. We don't have much time." Danny felt the panic rising in his chest. They were so close, yet it felt like they were running out of time. He glanced around the room, trying to think of a way to buy them more time. That's when he saw a large control panel next to the pedestal. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to the panel. Lyra turned, her eyes narrowing as she assessed it. "That's the defense system. It's connected to the mansion's security and can help us block their path for a little longer." but it's not designed for battle. It's only a temporary fix. Danny didn't hesitate. Let's use it. Anything to slow them down. Lyra nodded. She rushed over to the panel, her fingers flying over the buttons. The control panel lit up, and a series of locks clicked into place around the room, securing the entrance and sealing off the hallway. But Danny could still hear the Kelsari soldiers getting closer, their voices echoing in the mansion. "Done," Lyra said, her voice calm but strained. "That should buy us some time. But we need to move quickly." Danny's heart raced as he watched Lyra approach the pedestal. She reached out and carefully took the power crystal into her hands. The moment she held it, a strange energy seemed to pulse through the room. The crystal glowed brighter, and the air seemed to hum with power. "Is it working?" Danny asked, his voice filled with awe. Lyra nodded. "It's working. This is the energy I need to power my ship. Now we just need to get to it before the Kelsari break through." But as she spoke, the door to the basement began to rattle. The Kelsari had reached it. They were only moments away from breaking through. Lyra turned to Danny, her expression determined. "We have one chance. We fight our way out, or we lose everything." Danny's mind raced. He wasn't a fighter, but he couldn't let Lyra down. Not now. Not when they were so close. He picked up a heavy metal rod from a nearby table and gripped it tightly. "I'm with you." Together, they stood, ready to face whatever was coming. The Kelsari were almost at the door, and their last chance for survival was fast slipping away. The door to the basement rattled violently, the sound of Kelsari soldiers hammering against it sending waves of fear through Danny's chest. Lyra's eyes were fixed on the door, her hand tightly clutching the glowing crystal. She looked determined, but Danny could see the tension in her posture. They had one chance to escape. "We need to act now," Lyra said, her voice low but firm. "The Kelsari won't waste any time getting through that door. Once they do, we'll be trapped." Danny gripped the heavy metal rod in his hands, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't a soldier, but he had no choice now. He had to fight. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice tight with uncertainty. Lyra glanced around the room, her eyes scanning for any advantage. "There's a control panel near the door. I can set up a temporary shield to block them, but it won't last long. You'll need to hold them off." Danny nodded. He had no idea what kind of shield Lyra was talking about, but he trusted her. He looked at the door, waiting for the inevitable crash. The Kelsari were closing in, and the sounds of their boots stomping on the floor grew louder. The door creaked under the pressure, and Danny knew they didn't have much time. Lyra moved quickly, her hands working with practiced ease at the control panel. The lights in the basement flickered, and the air seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. Finally, with a soft beep, the panel activated. "There," Lyra said, stepping back. "The shield is up, but it won't hold for long. We have minutes, not hours." Danny could feel the heat rising in his chest. His grip tightened around the rod. "I'll buy you as much time as I can," he said. He wasn't sure how long he could hold off the Kelsari, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let them get to Lyra. The door to the basement shuddered with a loud crack, and then, with a terrifying bang, it exploded outward. Kelsari soldiers stormed into the room, their glowing eyes scanning for their prey. Their weapons were drawn, and they moved with military precision. There were at least 6 of them, maybe more. Danny didn't wait. He rushed toward the first soldier, swinging the metal rod with all his strength. It hit the soldier's armor with a loud clang, but the soldier barely flinched. Danny pulled back, barely avoiding a blast from the Kelsari's weapon. The beam hit the wall behind him, and the air sizzled with energy. Lyra shouted, "Danny, get back." But it was too late. The Kelsari soldier lunged forward, knocking Danny to the ground. His breath was knocked out of him, and for a moment, he couldn't move. The soldier raised his weapon, aiming directly at Danny's head. But before he could fire, Lyra moved with a speed that Danny couldn't follow. She raised her hands, and a burst of energy shot from her fingertips, hitting the soldier in the chest. He was thrown back, crashing into the wall with a deafening thud. Danny quickly scrambled to his feet, his heart racing. "Thanks," he gasped, looking at Lyra. "We don't have time for thanks," she said, her eyes focused on the remaining soldiers. "They'll keep coming. We need to fight our way out." Danny nodded, feeling the surge of determination. The shield Lyra had set up wasn't going to last long, and they had to move before the Kelsari broke through it. But as he glanced around the basement, he saw no easy escape. There was no back door, no window to climb through. They were trapped. "We need to get to my ship," Lyra said, reading his thoughts. "It's in the old hangar, below the mansion. We can't stay here." Danny didn't hesitate. He had no idea where the hangar was or how to get there, but he trusted Lyra. "Lead the way." They moved quickly, dodging another Kelsari blast as it narrowly missed them. Lyra grabbed Danny's arm, pulling him toward a narrow hallway at the back of the basement. The Kelsari soldiers were regrouping, and Danny could hear them shouting commands in their strange, guttural language. They wouldn't be far behind. Lyra led Danny down the hallway, her footsteps quick and precise. The walls of the mansion seemed to close in around them, the narrow path feeling more like a trap than an escape route. Danny's thoughts raced. How had all of this happened so fast? One moment, he was standing in the mansion with no idea what was going on. Now he was fighting for his life, trying to help an alien girl escape a ruthless enemy. They reached a door at the end of the hallway, and Lyra quickly tapped a sequence of numbers into the keypad. The door hissed open, revealing a dark, cavernous space. Danny's eyes widened in shock as he saw the ship. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was sleek, metallic, and glowed with an otherworldly light. The ship was clearly alien, its design both beautiful and intimidating. It looked like it could fly across galaxies in an instant. "That's your ship?" Danny asked, awe in his voice. Lyra nodded. "Yes, this is my way out. We need to get inside and activate the engines. I can repair the damage once we're in the air." But before they could move, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. The Kelsari soldiers were close, too close. "They're right behind us," Danny said, panic creeping into his voice. Lyra's face hardened. "We have to move now." She sprinted toward the ship, with Danny following closely behind. As they reached the ship's entrance, Lyra turned to face the Kelsari soldiers who were closing in. She raised her hands again, and energy crackled in the air. A brilliant blue light shot out from her fingertips, creating a barrier between them and the soldiers. "Go!" Lyra shouted. Danny didn't hesitate. He dashed inside the ship, diving for cover. He didn't know how long the barrier would hold, but it wouldn't be long enough to stop the Kelsari for good. Lyra was the last to enter, and as soon as she stepped inside, the ship's doors slammed shut. The ship hummed to life, and the lights inside flickered on. Danny's heart raced as Lyra moved to the controls. "Hold on," she said. "This might get rough." Before Danny could respond, the ship lifted off the ground with a powerful jolt. The Kelsari soldiers outside fired at the ship, but their blasts only hit the energy shield that Lyra had put up. The ship shot upward into the sky, breaking free from the mansion's gravity. As the mansion disappeared below them, Danny looked out of the window, realizing that their fight was far from over. They had escaped, this time, but there was no telling how long they had before the Kelsari found them again. The ship soared through the sky, its sleek body cutting through the clouds as it climbed higher and higher. Danny sat in one of the seats, his fingers gripping the armrests tightly. His heart was still racing, and he could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. They had escaped the Kelsari, but that didn't mean they were safe. The battle had only just begun. Lyra was focused on the controls, her fingers moving rapidly over the console as she piloted the ship. Her face was set in a determined expression, and Danny could tell she wasn't letting herself relax, Not even for a second. She was still on edge, always watching, always listening. "How long do you think we have before they catch up?" Danny asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lyra glanced at him, her expression grim. "Not long. The Kelsari have tracking technology. They'll know we're gone by now, and they'll be looking for us. If they have a ship close enough, they can catch up within a matter of hours." Danny's stomach twisted. The Kelsari were relentless. They wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted, and now that they knew Lyra was alive, they'd hunt her down with everything they had. "But we have a head start," Danny said, trying to stay hopeful. "Maybe we can outrun them." Lyra didn't answer right away. She focused on the ship's controls, her brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, after a long pause, she spoke. "The ship's fast, but the Kelsari won't give up easily. And there's something else. I'm not sure how long the ship's systems will hold up. We were in the process of repairing the ship before the attack, and there's damage I'm still working to fix. If we push it too hard, it could break down." Danny's eyes widened. "You mean we're not even fully ready to fly?" Lyra's eyes met his, her gaze sharp and serious. "Not yet, but we don't have a choice. If we don't get out of this system and find a safe place to hide, the Kelsari will find us sooner or later. We have to keep going." Danny nodded. He understood. There was no going back now. They had to stay ahead of the Kelsari, no matter what. The ship's engines hummed softly as they flew through the atmosphere, leaving the mansion far behind them. Danny tried to relax, but the thought of the Kelsari hunting them kept him on edge. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't truly safe. A few minutes later, Lyra's voice cut through the silence. "We need to leave the atmosphere and jump to another system. The farther we are from the Kelsari, the better." Danny looked out of the window. The stars were starting to come into view, distant and cold. They were leaving behind the planet, the mansion, and everything that had happened there. The future was uncertain, and a feeling of dread settled over him. Lyra's voice was calm but tense. "We'll jump in 3 minutes. Get ready." "Ready for what?" Danny asked. "Jumping through space is not smooth," Lyra said. "It's fast. The ship will accelerate quickly, and the force can feel overwhelming. Just hold on." Danny tightened his grip on the seat. He had no idea what she meant, but he wasn't about to question her. He nodded, even though his heart was still beating fast. The countdown began in the cockpit. 3, 2, 1, now. Without warning, the ship's engines roared to life, and everything around Danny blurred. The force of the acceleration pushed him back into his seat, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. His body felt heavy, as though gravity itself had increased tenfold. It was like nothing he had ever experienced. The ship seemed to stretch and bend the very fabric of space, and a dizzying sensation washed over him. His stomach flipped, and his head spun. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the feeling stopped. The ship jolted and Danny was thrown forward, gripping the seat in front of him to steady himself. He gasped for air, his heart still pounding. It felt as though the whole world had twisted around him for a moment. "We're in deep space now," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the jump. "We've made it out of the Kelsari's reach for the time being." Danny blinked, still recovering from the shock. "Are we safe?" Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. "For now. But we can't stay here for long. We need to find a hidden station or a safe haven. Somewhere the Kelsari won't be able to track us." Danny sighed in relief, but the tension in the air remained. The Kelsari were still out there, and they wouldn't stop hunting until they had what they wanted. "Where are we going?" Danny asked, trying to focus on something other than the uncertainty hanging over them. Lyra paused, her fingers hovering over the controls. "There's an old mining colony on a nearby moon. It's abandoned, but it's off the Kelsari's radar. I'll take us there." Danny nodded, trusting her judgment. "Sounds good. For the next few hours, the ship sailed through the cold, empty vastness of space. The stars stretched endlessly before them, the silence broken only by the hum of the engines. Danny couldn't stop thinking about how small they were in this vast expanse. The Kelsari had a galaxy to search, and they had to stay one step ahead. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lyra spoke again. "We're approaching the moon." Danny peered out the window. A dark, rocky world loomed ahead, covered in craters and dust. It looked lifeless, abandoned, perfect for hiding. As the ship descended toward the moon's surface, Danny couldn't shake the feeling that the Kelsari were still out there, waiting. But for now, they had a chance to breathe. "Get ready," Lyra said. "We're going to land." Danny braced himself as the ship touched down with a soft thud. They had made it to a temporary safe haven, but the battle wasn't over. The Kelsari would find them again, sooner or later. The ship settled onto the barren surface of the moon with a soft thud. Outside, the landscape was desolate, rocky, dusty, and silent. The perfect place to hide. Lyra took a deep breath, her hands still gripping the controls as she powered down the ship's systems. The quiet was almost peaceful, but Danny knew it wouldn't last. They had made it here, but they were far from safe. The Kelsari were relentless, and even though they had a head start, they wouldn't stop until they found them. Danny couldn't shake the feeling that they were just buying time. Lyra stood up from the cockpit, her face set in determination. "We'll need to move quickly. The Kelsari are excellent trackers. If they get too close, they'll find us here." Danny followed her out of the cockpit, his eyes scanning the ship's interior. The walls were sleek, alien technology humming softly around them. He was starting to get used to it, but he still felt out of place. The ship, the alien girl, everything felt so far beyond his normal life. "How long do we have?" Danny asked, walking beside her. "Hard to say," Lyra replied, her voice steady. "But we can't stay here for long. I've been trying to make repairs, but there's still a lot to do. The Kelsari might catch up sooner than we think." Danny nodded. "So what's the plan? How do we stop them?" Lyra stopped walking, her eyes meeting his. "We don't stop them. We get out of their reach. There's a system not far from here, where I know a few allies are hiding. If we can get to them, they'll help us. They might have a way to fix the ship fully, and we'll be able to fight back." Danny felt a spark of hope. Allies. That sounded like the beginning of a plan. For the first time in a while, he allowed himself to believe they could win. But even as he thought that, a deep sense of unease settled in his chest. They were on the run, and the Kelsari were closing in. Lyra led him toward the back of the ship, where a small hatch opened to reveal a set of tools and equipment. She began sorting through the items, her movements quick and precise. Danny stood by, unsure of what to do, but then he remembered the rod he had grabbed back in the basement. "Can I help with anything?" he asked. Lyra glanced up, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You can help by staying out of sight for now. I need to make—" Danny didn't take offense. He understood. She was the expert, and he was still trying to make sense of everything happening around him. "I'll keep watch then," he said, moving toward one of the ship's windows. The moon's surface outside was eerily quiet. No sign of the Kelsari yet, but Danny knew they wouldn't be far behind. They had to keep moving. Hours passed, with Lyra working steadily, adjusting the ship's systems, and checking the engines. Danny tried to keep his mind focused, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the fight. He had never imagined his life would take such a strange turn. One moment, he was a regular guy living a quiet life in a mansion he inherited, and the next, he was on the run from an alien race with no idea what was really at stake. Finally, Lyra stood up, wiping the sweat from her brow. "We're ready to go," she said. "We need to leave before the Kelsari pick up our trail." Danny nodded. "Let's do it." They moved quickly back to the cockpit, and Lyra took her seat at the controls. She worked in silence for a moment, adjusting settings and running final checks on the ship's systems. Danny sat beside her, his heart racing as they prepared to leave the moon's surface. As Lyra engaged the engines, the ship lifted off the ground with a smooth motion. Danny watched out the window as the barren landscape grew smaller, the rocky surface fading away as they shot back into space. "We're heading to the system I mentioned," Lyra said as the ship accelerated. "It'll take us a few hours, but we should be safe there." Danny settled back in his seat, trying to relax, but the thought of the Kelsari kept gnawing at him. How long would they stay hidden? Would the Kelsari find them again, or would they finally be free? As the ship glided through the stars, Lyra spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "I know you're scared. We both are. But we're not alone in this. I have allies out there, and I won't stop fighting until we have a chance." Danny looked over at her, her words resonating deeply. She was an alien, far from home, on the run from an enemy she had no chance of defeating alone. But she had hope, and that was something he hadn't allowed himself to have in a long time. "You're right," Danny said quietly. "We're not alone." Lyra gave him a small, tired smile. "No, we're not." As they moved farther into deep space, the tension in the air remained. The Kelsari could be anywhere, and the ship's systems were still fragile. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Danny believed they had a chance. They didn't know what the future would hold. They didn't know if they'd ever be safe from the Kelsari. But they had each other, and together, they would face whatever came next. As the ship traveled deeper into the galaxy, Lyra's eyes flickered toward the stars outside. There was hope now, a glimmer of something they could fight for. And for the first time, Danny allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could win this fight.